The diner clock flickered 3 a.m. in dull neon red. Outside, the streets were silent, just puddles, reflecting forgotten dreams and traffic lights changing for no one. Inside, the hiss of the coffee machine echoed louder than the radio, which played a soft jazz tune no one was awake to hear. Daniel wiped down the same counter he'd wiped 100 times before. His eyes were half closed, hands moving on autopilot, sleeves rolled to the elbows, grease stain on his apron older than some of the booths. He wasn't tired from lack of sleep. He was tired from trying. He glanced at the door. No customers, not yet. A bell jingled. A man entered, tall, silent. Wore the same dark overcoat every night, like it belonged to a colder city. He didn't speak. He didn't nod. He walked straight to table 9, the far booth in the corner, and sat with his back to the wall. Daniel noticed, but said nothing. They'd played this silent ritual before, but a plate of eggs and toast appeared minutes later, slid gently across the table by Daniel. Without a word, the man stared at it like it was a memory. Daniel returned behind the counter. He scratched his beard, watching the man from the corner of his eye, more curious than cautious. Outside, rain started again. Soft, steady. Like fingers tapping on a coffin, the clock clicked to 3:12 a.m. Daniel muttered to himself, "He's early tonight." No one responded, not even the jazz, not even the man in the corner, but something about the air had shifted, as if the diner itself was holding its breath. And table 9 had started watching back. The man in the corner didn't eat. He never did. He sat like a statue carved from regret, hands folded, eyes fixed on something distant, something not even in the diner, maybe not even in this lifetime. Daniel tried not to stare. But some nights like this one, the silence pressed too hard. It folded into the corners of the room, crept up the windows, and wrapped around the old jukebox that hadn't worked in 5 years. The only sound was the occasional clink of silverware being sorted and the low hum of the refrigerator. Daniel poured coffee into a chipped mug and walked it over. He placed it gently on the table, beside the untouched plate. The man didn't look up, didn't move. "On the house," Daniel said, barely above a whisper. Still nothing. But when Daniel turned to walk back, the man's hand moved slow, deliberate. He placed a $1 bill beneath the mug. Daniel glanced back. It was always $1, more than the bill, every single night, always neatly folded, always weighted with something more than paper. He walked away, pretending not to care. But his hand shook a little. It wasn't the man's silence that unsettled him. It was the way he never seemed real, like someone had forgotten to erase him from the past. At 3:47 a.m., the man stood. He walked to the counter, left a 10 without a word, and exited into the rain. Daniel watched as the door swung shut behind him. But the street was already empty. No footsteps, no shadow. Just steam on the window and the faint smell of something old, like books, or winter coats, or the part of grief that never really leaves. And at table 9, the coffee was still warm, but the chair was cold. Daniel sat on the back step behind the diner, elbows on knees, phone pressed to his ear. The rain had slowed to a mist now, like the sky was too tired to cry. His voice cracked around the edges. "You still awake?" A sleepy giggle answered him. "It's a school night, Daddy. I know. I missed your voice," she yawned. "Did you get a tip tonight?" Daniel smiled, though his eyes didn't. "Not much, but I'm close. Just a few more shifts and you'll be on that trip." There was a pause. "Daddy, it's okay if I don't go." Daniel's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" "I know it's a lot. Miss Sanders said I didn't have to go if my dad couldn't afford it." Silence. Rain tapped the dumpster lid beside him like a slow metronome. And Daniel swallowed hard. "You're going," he said. "Steady now. Even if I have to serve coffee till sunrise every day from now till Christmas." Another pause. "You're the best dad in the world." He let that sit in the air for a second, afraid that, if he answered, he'd fall apart. "I love you, Maya. I love you too. Night-night." The call ended. Daniel stared at the screen a long time before pocketing the phone. Then, without warning, his eyes welled fast and heavy. Like someone had flipped a switch he'd been holding off all week. He wiped them quick with his sleeve, stood, and walked back inside. The diner lights flickered. He returned to his station, flipped a rag over his shoulder, and began wiping down the tables again. At table 9, The chair still held an invisible weight. But tonight, Daniel did to Dot, and neither one of them said a word. The late shift dragged on like molasses. On cold glass, Daniel sat in the break booth, alone now, feet aching, apron unbuttoned. The radio played some old love song strings soft, vocals barely there, the kind of tune that made empty diners feel like cathedrals. From his back pocket, he pulled out his wallet. It was old, cracked along the fold, stuffed with receipts and loyalty punch cards no one ever remembered to use. But behind them, tucked like something sacred, was a photograph. A woman, smiling, wind in her hair, a daughter in her arms. Daniel in the background, half laughing, half choking on whatever joke she'd just cracked. Maya was maybe 3, pink sunglasses, no shoes. His thumb traced the edges of the photo like he could smooth the years away. "You'd be proud," he whispered. The words sounded too loud in the stillness. He held the photo closer, like it could warm his hands. Her name echoed in his chest. Not said, not out loud, but remembered, softer than breath, sharper than bone. He took a slow breath, folded the photo carefully, and slid it back into the wallet. Then he pulled a napkin from the holder and set it in front of him like a plate. From the fridge, he took the leftover club sandwich no one ordered, sat back down, ate half, left the rest. It didn't taste like anything. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, stood up, and started clearing mugs again. The diner was silent. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with ghosts, memory-shaped ones that sat across from him, laughed in echoes, kissed him on the forehead, and disappeared before the coffee cooled. And tonight, he let one of them sit with him. Just for a while. Don't you ever wonder why he always sits there? The question drifted through the steam of the dishwasher. Carried by Angie, the night waitress, with a bobbed haircut and eyes that had seen too much, Daniel didn't look up. He was scrubbing a plate harder than necessary. "I don't wonder anymore," he said. "I just serve." Angie leaned against the counter, arms folded, gum snapping softly. "Well, I heard he used to come in with his daughter. Years ago. Before she died." Daniel paused. "You heard that from who?" "Joey, before he quit." Daniel returned to his plates, face unreadable. He sits at the same booth, same time, never speaks, never orders, but always leaves the exact same tip. Angie's voice dropped. "Creepy, right? It's like he's waiting for someone who'll never show up." "Or maybe," Daniel said, drying his hands, "he's showing up for someone who never got to wait." Angie blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" Daniel didn't answer. He grabbed the coffee pot and stepped out into the main floor again, where silence reigned and Table 9 gleamed under the dim lights. The man wasn't there tonight, but the booth still held his outline, like time had carved his presence into the vinyl. "I saw him cry once," Angie whispered from behind. Daniel stopped pouring. "What, 3 weeks ago?" "Just for a second. Right after you brought him eggs." Daniel turned slowly. His hands were shaking. He wiped his face when you weren't looking, like someone who didn't know how to grieve anymore. Daniel stared at the booth. It was just a seat, just a table. But some nights it felt like a confession. And tonight, it felt like something was coming. Something that hadn't sat down yet, but was already here. The morning sun was pale, thin, the kind of light that didn't warm, just revealed. Daniel stood outside Maya's school, leaning on the fence, still wearing his diner shoes. His eyelids were heavy, his breath fogging in the cold. The bell rang, and the kids poured out like laughter in motion. Maya spotted him. "Daddy!" She ran into his arms, lunchbox swinging wildly. He scooped her up, eyes closing as her arms wrapped around his neck like she was the only real thing in his world. "You didn't have to pick me up," she giggled. "I could have walked." "I know," he said. But today felt like a daddy picks you up kind of day. They walked slowly down the sidewalk. Her steps were light. His, tired. "I have something to tell you," she said, cheeks pink with excitement. "I want to try out for the music program. Miss Renner says I have a good ear. There's an audition next month. If I practice and do good, they might give me a spot." Daniel smiled. "What do you need?" She looked up, hesitant. "A piano." His heart clenched. "A real one?" he asked gently. "No," she said quickly. "Just a keyboard. A used one is okay. I found one online. It's only $200. Daniel kept his face steady. "We'll figure it out. You promise?" He looked into her eyes, her mother's eyes, and nodded. "I promise," she beamed, skipping ahead. But behind the smile, Daniel's stomach twisted. $200 might as well have been 2,000 still. He watched her twirl with hope, chasing invisible music in the air, and he knew, somehow, that he'd rather lose sleep, blood, or pride than let her dream go quiet. The diner was nearly empty. Sun peeking through cracked blinds like it was ashamed to witness what was about to happen. Daniel stood at the register, apron loose, hand outstretched. "Hey, Mark, you forgot my overtime from last weekend." The manager, mid-40s, with a gut full of excuses and a clipboard he never really used, didn't look up. "No, I didn't." Daniel blinked. "I worked 3 doubles in a row. I clocked in, signed the sheet. Checks short." Mark sighed, flipping papers lazily. "You left early on Saturday, remember? Walked out at 4:40. Daniel's voice tightened. "My daughter was sick. I asked. You said it was fine." Mark finally looked at him, eyes cold, smile lazy. "I said you could go. Never said it was paid." Daniel stood frozen, not shocked, just tired of being shocked. "It's $38. Mark shrugged. "It's policy. You want to argue? Take it up with corporate." Daniel didn't move. The register beeped, waiting for a button that no one was going to press. $38 means my kid eats all week, and I'm not your kid's father," Mark replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Daniel didn't finish the fight. He couldn't afford to lose the job. Not today. He turned, grabbed his coat, and stepped into the morning cold. No umbrella. No destination. Just sidewalk under his boots, and a storm cloud above that had nothing to do with weather. Rain returned, slow, deliberate. Each step soaked deeper than the last. His back hunched, not from the weight of water, from the weight of knowing. No one was coming to help. The wind whispered in alleyways, and somewhere behind him, the diner lights flickered again, but no one noticed, especially not the man, who had forgotten how to ask for what he deserved. It was just past 3 a.m. when Daniel re-entered the diner, soaked and silent. His shoes squeaked against the tile. He shook off his jacket, slung it over the counter stool, and poured himself a cup of coffee, the kind that tasted more like survival than flavor. The night was quiet. To quiet. Until he noticed it table 9. Empty. But different. Daniel walked over slowly. The booth was clean, untouched. The plate and mug had been cleared, but he hadn't done it. No other staff had clocked in yet. And there, tucked beneath the sugar jar, was a plain white envelope. His name was written on it. Just one line, in slanted handwriting. "For the man who never stops." His hands hovered over it like it might burn. For a second, he just stared, like the envelope held a secret too big to open under fluorescent light. Finally, he slid into the booth, sat across from the empty seat, and opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. No money, no explanation. Just a short note, scrawled in tired ink. "You remind me of someone I never got to be." Daniel exhaled slowly, heart thudding in his ears. He looked around. No sign of the man. No footprints on the wet floor. No receipt. Just that chair across from him, pushed in neatly, like someone had finally finished saying goodbye. Daniel read the note again, and then folded it back into the envelope and pressed it to his chest right over the spot that had been hollow for months. The diner clock blinked to 3:17 a.m., and for the first time, Daniel didn't feel like he was waiting tables. He felt like someone had just served him something rare, a reason to keep going. Daniel sat at table 9. For the first time, the vinyl seat creaked beneath him, familiar but foreign. He'd served this booth for years, but never once rested in it. Now, with the envelope clutched in his hand like scripture, he sank into the quiet. Rain tapped gently on the windows. The diner buzzed low with the sound of old wiring and older dreams. He unfolded the note again. "You remind me of someone I never got to be." Underneath it now, tucked deeper in the envelope, something he hadn't noticed before, $300 in cash, wrapped in a napkin. Daniel stared at it, breath frozen in his chest. He didn't count it. He didn't need to. It was exact, neat, intentional. He looked around as if someone might jump out and shout, "Gotcha!" But the place was empty. Even the ghosts were still. He stood, stepped outside, scanned the parking lot. Nothing. No dark coat disappearing into the street. No headlights. Just the hush of early morning and puddles stretching into the darkness. Back inside, he sat again. Why him? Why now? He stared across the table like the man might materialize from steam and shadows. But all that remained was the coffee stain from last night and the hollow echo of unspoken things. Not yet. He just sat there, silent, still like the booth had finally invited him into its secret, like the diner had chosen to whisper back. And as the sun threatened to rise behind the blinds, Daniel folded the napkin, slid the money into his wallet, and left the note exactly where he found it. Facing the chair, waiting for an answer, the school hallway smelled like waxed floors and teenage nerves. Daniel sat across from Miss Renner in her cramped office, knees bouncing under the table. A hand-drawn poster behind her read, "Let their music speak before they do." She adjusted her glasses. "Maya's talented, Mr. Holt. But the audition's in 7 days." "I know," he said, voice rough from lack of sleep. "She needs more than practice time on the school piano. She needs access at home, familiar keys, consistency, confidence. I'm working on it." She hesitated. "Do you have one already?" "Not yet." The silence between them stretched. "She doesn't know I'm here," he added. "I just wanted to ask. If there's any program, any leftover grant, anything at all." Miss Renner softened. "I've looked. Trust me, I want her to succeed too." Daniel nodded. "Thanks anyway." As he stood, she touched his arm gently. "She plays like someone who's trying to say something no one else hears." He forced a small smile. "She gets that from her mom." Outside, Daniel stepped into the parking lot, wind slicing through his coat. He pulled out his phone, opened the local listings, and typed "used keyboard." Under $200, nothing. He refreshed. Still nothing. He turned the corner and passed a pawn shop. The kind with dusty windows and flickering signs. He paused inside, behind a chipped guitar and a stack of old DVDs. Stood a keyboard, black, full-sized, slightly scratched. Price, tag, $240. Daniel pressed his forehead to the glass, watching it like it might disappear behind him. The wind knocked over a nearby trash bin. End in his chest. The same clock that had been ticking for weeks now pounded, louder. 1 week. 7 days. And her dream was either going to rise or go silent. The car smelled like fast food grease and exhaustion. The Uber app blinked on Daniel's cracked phone screen, searching for next rider. He rubbed his eyes. It was almost midnight. He had worked 8 hours at the diner, scarfed a gas station sandwich, and was now 2 rides into his second job. "I just need 4 more rides," he mumbled. "That's it." His fingers gripped the wheel tighter as his phone buzzed. New ride, 5 miles away. He tapped accept, shifted the car into drive, and pulled into the empty road, streetlights casting flickering halos on the rain-slick pavement. The heater groaned. His eyelids sagged. Music played. Low, a piano piece Maya loved. Each note sounded like a reminder. Each pause, a countdown. The stoplight turned red. Daniel blinked slowly, too slowly. The world tilted. The car lurched forward with a soft crunch. His head snapped up. He had rolled into the back of a parked delivery van. No airbags. No injuries. Just the sound of failure. A man stepped out of the van, confused. "You all right, man?" Daniel stepped out, hands raised. "I'm sorry. I must have closed my eyes." The man looked him over. "You look like you ain't slept in a week." Daniel didn't respond. By the time he opened his phone again, a notification had popped up. "Your account has been temporarily suspended, pending review." He stood in the rain alone, and very awake now. $100 slipped through his fingers like it was never his to begin with. He stared at the dashboard, breathing heavy, and in the back seat, beside an old car seat Maya had long outgrown, was the folded diner napkin from table 9, still untouched, still waiting. The bell above the diner door jingled, soft as a sigh. It was 3:02 a.m. Daniel looked up from refilling the ketchup bottles. The man was back, same coat, same silence. But something about him felt slower tonight. Like each step toward table 9 cost a little more than before. Daniel didn't say anything. He just nodded once, grabbed the usual plate, eggs, dry toast, black coffee, and slid it onto the table. But this time, The man did something new. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, old, yellowed, carefully, opened and smoothed flat on the table between them. Daniel leaned over. It was a handwritten menu, simple dishes, cursive writing, a smudge near the corner where maybe a teardrop once landed. The man tapped one item with a crooked finger. Clara's biscuit gravy. Add the time after the boil. Daniel raised a brow. That yours? For the first time, the man spoke, voice low and cracked like a floorboard in winter. She liked this, that was all. He slid the menu toward Daniel like it belonged to him now, then picked up his fork, slowly stirred his eggs without eating. Daniel didn't press. He just took the paper gently, folded it with care, and tucked it into his apron like it was made of gold leaf. Something about the way the man said she, not past tense, not grief-stricken, just full of weight and memory. It rang like a chord Maya would play when she didn't know anyone was listening. Daniel stood still for a moment, then turned back toward the kitchen. But behind him, at table 9, the man wasn't eating. He was holding the fork like it was a photograph, and staring into somewhere only he could see. You're skating on thin ice, Holt. The words hit like a slammed freezer door. Mark, arms crossed, stood at the end of the line, clipboard in hand, like it made him God. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow, hands still shaking from pouring coffee too fast. You dropped a plate last night, almost shattered near a customer. There were no customers, Daniel muttered. Bark stepped closer. Doesn't matter. It's a pattern. Late orders, slow cleanup, spacing out mid-shift. You want to lose this job too? Daniel's jaw clenched. I worked 2 doubles this week. Covered Josh's shift when he bailed. I even unclogged the bathroom drain when nobody else would, and still. Mark leaned in. You're one mistake away from walking. Daniel looked past him toward the window. Rain again, of course. He said nothing. Just nodded once. Not in agreement, in defeat. Later that night, the diner moved like molasses. Grease sizzled, coffee steamed. And Daniel moved like a shadow under buzzing lights. 3:09 a.m. he carried 2 plates, eggs, over easy, bacon crisp, booth 6 and table 9.1 in each hand. A cough startled him, sharp. Sudden he turned his head. The left plate slipped. Crack! It hit the edge of the counter, bounced once, and shattered on the floor. Mark's head shot up from the back office. Seriously, Daniel crouched, picking up shards with bare fingers. One slice opened the side of his thumb. Blood bloomed fast. I've got it, he muttered, but Mark was already walking over. Final warning. Daniel said nothing, just bled quietly onto a napkin, and from across the diner, the man at table 9 was watching, not eating, not blinking, just watching, like he knew what it felt like to be one slip away from losing everything. The letter came on a Thursday. Daniel found it folded into Maya's backpack. Hidden beneath a math worksheet and a peanut butter sandwich she hadn't finished, the envelope was plain, no logo, just her name written in black marker. Maya Holt. He sat on the couch, his apron still on, the day still clinging to him. Maya. He called Dot. She peeked around the corner, hesitant. What's this? She smiled, that shy kind of smile that always came before news, too big for her little voice. She told me to open it at home. Daniel nodded, handed it back. Go on. She tore it gently, like it might tear her dream if she moved too fast. She read silently, then gasped. Daddy? I got in. The paper shook in her hands. They picked me. I get to audition for the regional showcase. In front of real music teachers. Daniel blinked. You did? She nodded furiously. It says I have 2 weeks to prepare. If I pass the audition, I get a spot for the summer program and maybe a scholarship later. She jumped into his arms before he could speak. I'm gonna win, Daddy. I promise. I'm gonna make them see me. He hugged her tight, heart thudding against hers. They already do, baby. But in the back of his mind, panic crept in. The piano, the time, the money, the keyboard in the pawn shop window he hadn't been able to claim. She pulled back, beaming. Do you believe in me? Daniel kissed her forehead. With everything I've got. Outside, the sky turned the color of old paper. Inside, a little girl danced in the living room, and a father sat still, smiling through the quiet storm in his chest. The knock came just past midnight. 3 soft taps. Not loud enough to wake the neighbors, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. Daniel froze mid-step, dish towel in hand. Maya was already asleep in the other room, wrapped in a blanket fort made from couch cushions and dreams. He stepped to the door cautiously. Looked through the peephole. Empty porch, no footsteps. No car, no shadow slipping down the street, just the hum of a flickering streetlight and wind nudging dead leaves across the sidewalk. He opened the door. Anyway, nothing. Then he looked down an envelope. Crisp, white, resting. Neatly on the doormat, Daniel picked it up, heart-pounding, no name on the outside. No return address, just like the first one. He stepped back inside, locked the door. Checked on Maya. She stirred, but didn't wake. Then he sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling as he opened the envelope. Inside, cash, more than before. And a photograph, a man younger, smiling with a little girl on his shoulders. Sunlight behind them, her curls wild in the wind. His eyes full of something that looked like joy before time wrung it dry. Daniel flipped the photo on the back, scrawled in the same sharp handwriting. She saved me once. No signature. No explanation, just wait. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the image. It wasn't just money anymore. It was story, history, something reaching from another. Life into his own. He set the photo down gently beside the envelope, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel poor, he felt chosen. Outside, the streetlight buzzed again. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked slow, and in the hush between those seconds, a promise unspoken, but louder than any door knock the next morning. Daniel didn't open the diner. He called in, voice hoarse. Words simple. Family emergency. Mark grunted something about docking his pay. Daniel hung up before he could care. He sat at the kitchen table, the second envelope beside him, the photo still resting on its face. $700. He counted it twice, slowly, like he might wake up in the middle of it and find it was all a dream. Across from him, Maya munched cereal. Why are you home this morning? Daniel smiled. Just wanted to have breakfast with you. She lit up. Can I play the pretend piano again after? He nodded. Soon, maybe you won't have to pretend. Her eyes widened. Really? He didn't answer. Just kissed the top of her head. Later, after she left for school, Daniel sat alone with the photograph. He stared at the back again. She saved me once. Who was she? The girl in the photo. A daughter, a sister. A memory too heavy to name. He looked closer. The man in the picture, now that he studied it, did look familiar. Just younger, less worn. But the eyes were the same. Table 9, he pulled out the first note again. Placed it beside the photo, then the menu, then the envelope. 3 pieces of a man whose story was speaking in silence, not asking for anything, just offering redemption through breadcrumbs, through bills, through quiet. Daniel stood, took the cash, and placed it in an old coffee tin above the fridge, the one he once used to store receipts and wishes. Then he whispered to the empty room, We're almost there, baby girl. And as the sun crept across the floorboards, the photograph caught it just right, lighting the little girl's smile like a sunrise that hadn't stopped saving people. The pawn shop smelled like dust and old metal. Daniel stood just inside the doorway, coat dripping from the drizzle outside. He scanned the shelves of forgotten things, rusted bikes, faded VHS tapes, a guitar with no strings, and there it was, the keyboard, still in the corner. Still waiting, he stepped toward it, like approaching an altar. The same $240 tag hung from its edge. Curling slightly at the corners, a bell rang overhead as the shop owner looked up from a small TV behind the counter. You came back, he said. Daniel nodded. You still got it? Didn't think anyone else would want it. The man shrugged. Plays good, though. A little dusty. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and placed a wad of bills on the counter. No tax, no questions. The man counted it slowly. You got a kid who plays... Daniel smiled. She's about to... That afternoon, Maya stepped off the school bus, backpack swinging. She paused when she saw the living room window. Curtains drawn wide. Lights on. And the sound. Faint, soft, uncertain. Music. She ran inside. Her mouth fell open. There it was, full-sized black keys, gleaming. Her name written in tiny pink letters on a sticky note above middle C. Her hands flew to her face. Daddy. I told you I'd figure it out. Tears welled in her eyes. It's real. Try it. She sat, pressed one key, then another. Choppy, hesitant, but beautiful, like someone learning how to breathe again. She turned to him, voice cracking. I'm gonna win, Daddy, I promise. He knelt beside her, holding her close. You already did. And as her fingers found the first real melody of her life, Daniel finally exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath for years. The diner was unusually quiet for 3 a.m. Daniel walked in with tired eyes and sore hands, expecting the same familiar rhythm, lights humming, coffee brewing, and the man in the dark coat, already waiting at table 9, but the booth was empty. Daniel blinked, checked the door, looked down the street through the window. Nothing. He busied himself behind the counter, pouring a fresh pot, half watching the door, 3:05. Still no one. He grabbed a rag, slowly wiping down tables. When he reached table 9, he paused, stared at the seat across from him, still empty. He straightened the salt shaker, adjusted the sugar jar like always, but it felt wrong, like dressing a grave for someone who hadn't been buried. Yet he sat down, took a breath, listened to the silence. He thought of the photo, the notes, the envelopes, the way the man stirred his coffee without drinking, the way his eyes never settled on this world. And suddenly, Daniel realized something. That booth didn't just hold a customer, it held a confession, a pattern, a wound that returned every night to sit where it bled the least. But tonight, the air felt lighter, or lonelier. He couldn't tell which. He stared across the table, expecting to see that slow nod, that silent thank you. Nothing, only the hum of the lights. Above, only the echo of a ghost who hadn't said goodbye. Daniel left the booth exactly as it was. No plate, no coffee, just space. And as he stepped away, he looked back once more, half expecting the man to appear from the shadows, but all he saw was an empty chair. And somehow, it felt louder than words. The living room was a symphony of sunlight and nervous breath. Maya sat at the keyboard, legs swinging off the edge, her tiny fingers hovering over the keys like they were glass. Daniel sat nearby, coffee in hand. Trying not to look anxious, but failing, she pressed a note, then another, hesitant, wobbly, out of order. She paused. I forgot the middle part. That's okay, he said gently. Play what you remember. She took a breath and started again, this time slower. A soft melody unfolded, shaky but sweet, like a lullaby learning how to stand. Halfway through, she stopped. It's not good enough. Daniel stood, walked over, and crouched beside her. You know what music really is? He asked. She shook her head. It's not perfection. It's trying again. It's starting even when you're scared you'll mess up. She looked at him. You think I'll mess up? He smiled. I hope you do. That means you're getting better. She giggled and pressed another key, this time with more confidence. Then something strange happened. She began to play a small phrase, for notes, over and over. A slow, rising pattern. Daniel froze. It was familiar, the same notes the man at table 9 used to hum under his breath. He never spoke. But now, the melody was coming through Maya's hands, like it had passed from grief into grace. Where'd you learn that? He asked quietly. She shrugged. I didn't know, it just came to me. Daniel's chest tightened. He watched her fingers float over the keys, the tune haunting the room like a whispered name. And in that moment, he wasn't sure who was teaching who anymore, because somehow, his daughter was playing the sound of a soul he hadn't met yet fully, but was beginning to understand. The next night, Daniel wiped down the tables as usual. Though table 9 remained untouched, and untouched still felt wrong. He knelt beside the booth, adjusting the legs of the chair like it made a difference. That's when he saw it. Something small tucked into the crack between the cushion and the wall. He reached in, fingers brushing something plastic. He pulled it free. A hospital, WRIST BAND. White. Faded, his breath caught. Printed in smudged black ink, Liddell, Thomas A. Ward for B. He sat down hard, still holding it, like the air had been knocked out of him. Thomas, he said, the name aloud, barely above a whisper, like testing its weight. It sounded right. Worn, honest, like someone who'd lived too long with something unsaid. Daniel turned the band over. There was a date just 2 weeks ago, so recent it made his skin prickle. The man had been sitting there since then, carrying hospital time in his pocket, tucked beneath vinyl in silence. Why here? Why him? Why Maya's music? He stood, mind racing. Checked the clock. 3:37 a.m. The hospital wasn't far. He didn't even grab his coat. Just shoved the wristband into his pocket, locked the diner door behind him, and stepped into the cold dot. Each step down the sidewalk felt heavier than the last. Not fear, but something stranger, recognition, the kind of feeling that says, you're about to meet the part of someone's story they never told you. And as the city slept, Daniel walked toward the only truth the man had ever left behind. Hospitals always smelled like plastic hope and quiet endings. Daniel stepped through the sliding doors of St. Jude's. The wristband, still in his coat pocket, clutched like a secret. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting pale shadows on tired floors. At the front desk, a nurse looked up. "Can I help you?" He cleared his throat. "Thomas, a little. I think he's in room 204B. She checked the computer. He's still listed. End of hall wing. Take the elevator and turn left. The walk down the corridor felt like threading a needle through time. 204B. He stood outside the door, heart thudding. He knocked once, then pushed gently. The room was dim, curtains half drawn. A single monitor beeped slowly. Beside the window sat the man from table 9. Thinner now, paler, but unmistakable Thomas. He opened his eyes as Daniel stepped in. They didn't widen, didn't flinch, just softened, like he'd been waiting. "You showed up," Thomas said, voice dry but steady. Daniel approached, quiet. "You left something behind." He held out the wristband. Thomas looked at it, smiled faintly. "That's how they keep you tethered. Little bands and big regrets." Daniel sat in the chair beside the bed. I figured if someone disappears from table 9, they'd better have a good excuse. Thomas chuckled. A dry, cracked sound. "Best excuse I've got." Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. "I'm Daniel," he said finally. Thomas nodded. "I know." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Thomas turned to face him fully, eyes shining under the IV light. "You remind me of someone. I once promised I'd become." Daniel swallowed, and in that tiny hospital room with machines humming and winter light bleeding through thin curtains, 2 men sat across from each other, and neither had to explain why they understood each other without trying. The room held a silence that didn't ask to be filled. Thomas leaned back against his pillow, eyes tracing the ceiling like it carried memories only he could read. Daniel sat beside him, the chair cold, his coffee untouched. "She was 8 when I left," Thomas began, voice slow, like each word had to be coaxed out. "Her name was Eliza. Curly hair, laughed like wind chimes." Daniel listened. "Still, I thought I was protecting her," Thomas continued. "I was drinking too much, working too little. Thought leaving would spare her from becoming like me." Daniel's hands tightened in his lap. "But I disappeared so clean. I didn't even leave a bruise," Thomas said bitterly. "Just a hole she had to learn to walk around." He turned his head, eyes wet now. I watched her from afar, from parking lots, from across street corners. Birthday parties I wasn't invited to. Daniel's voice was soft. "Did she ever see you?" Thomas shook his head. "Maybe once. But if she did, she never let on. I missed her graduation, her wedding," he exhaled slowly. "Then one day, I stopped watching. Didn't think I deserved the view." Silence. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out the photograph, the one of Thomas with Eliza on his shoulders. "Think she saved you more than you'll ever know." Thomas took it gently, hands trembling. "She did," he whispered. "They sat like that for a while to fathers, bound by different roads but the same ache." Daniel finally spoke. "I'm raising mine the best I can. Single shift, single hope at a time." Thomas looked at him. "You remind me of the man I should have been." And in that room, under flickering fluorescent lights, one man held his regrets. The other carried them forward. Outside the hospital room, the sun had started to rise, just a faint blush along the edge of the city skyline. Inside, Thomas's breath rattled lightly, the room heavy with stories not yet told. Daniel pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. Maya's recital invitation, printed in colored ink and crayon decorations, her name circled in stars. He handed it over. "She's playing in the regional showcase," he said quietly. "Next Friday, the piece she's working on. It sounds like something you used to hum." Thomas studied the paper, eyes scanning every word like it was a map back to a part of himself he'd buried. "She's good." Daniel smiled. "She's got something, not polished yet. But it's there. You hear it when she forgets to be nervous." Thomas exhaled, his fingers brushing over Maya's name. "I'd like to come," he whispered. "You should," Daniel replied. "I think she's been playing for more than just me." Thomas's throat bobbed. "I don't have much time left, Daniel. That's not me being dramatic. It's the monitor's way of counting down." "I know." A long pause stretched. "I might not make it," Thomas added, voice thinner now. "But if she plays that night, tell her." Daniel leaned forward. Thomas's eyes met his. "Tell her someone out there." Understood every note. Daniel nodded. His own voice stuck somewhere in the space between pride and sorrow. He stood, clasped Thomas's hand, strong for just a moment, then turned toward the door as he opened it. Thomas called after him. "She's got your eyes, you know." Daniel paused, heartful. "She's got her mother's strength," he said without turning back. And with that, he stepped into the hallway, leaving the door cracked, just wide enough for Hope to follow. The envelope was waiting on the diner counter. When Daniel returned, no name, no stamp, just there like it had always belonged. He stared at it for a long moment, unsure if his hands were ready for whatever it held. But he picked it up, fingers trembling, and walked to table 9. He sat in the booth, slowly, like a ritual. The hum of the fridge filled the silence as he opened the flap. Inside dash keys, a short letter, and a folded slip of paper that looked like a deed. Daniel unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning slowly, breath caught in his throat. "If you're reading this, then I've left the table for good. I never got to finish the things I started. But watching you, night after night, working, loving, sacrificing, it gave me something I hadn't felt in years. A mirror, a memory, a second chance, even if only to witness it in someone else. The diner's been mine since 1989. Most never knew. I kept it quiet after my daughter passed. Couldn't bear to own something when I couldn't even face my own name. But I saw something in you, and in your daughter. These keys are yours. So is the deed. Fix the roof. Paint the walls. Open the windows. Let it be hers one day. Dash Thomas A. Liddell. Daniel didn't move for a long time, letter in hand. World paused. The man he thought was a ghost had left him a home. Tears welled, but he didn't wipe them. And as the first customer of the morning walked in, Daniel stood, keys clutched tightly, and whispered toward the empty booth. "You did finish something, Thomas." Then he smiled through the tears. "You finished it in me." The stage lights bathed everything in soft gold. Daniel stood near the back of the auditorium, hands tucked into his coat, heart pounding like it had memorized Maya's song before she even touched the keys. She walked onto the stage, nervous, but brave, hair pulled back, dress simple, eyes scanning the crowd like she was looking for someone beyond the lights. She found him. He raised his hand slightly, and she smiled, that half-smile that always made him forget the weight of the world. She sat at the piano. A hush fell. Her fingers hovered, trembling for just a second. Then she began to play, not perfectly, not without stumbles, but with heart. The melody unfolded like breath-rising, dipping, pausing. The same tune Daniel had heard hummed late at night at table 9. The same haunting thread that had passed from a grieving man's silence into the hands of a little girl who knew nothing of his past, but carried it anyway. The audience leaned, in Daniel's eyes, filled as he recorded every note on his phone, not just for memory, for someone else. When she finished, the silence broke into applause. But Maya didn't rise. Not yet. She looked out again, this time not for her father, but for the seat that would always remain empty. Backstage, Daniel knelt beside her as she clutched her ribbon. "I did it," she whispered. He nodded, voice cracking. He heard every note. Later, outside beneath the stars, Daniel sent the video to an old hospital number, the only contact he had. Then he looked up at the sky, breathed deep, and whispered, "She knows, Thomas. She knows you played through her tonight." And for the first time, the night felt full of music that would never be forgotten. The next morning was quiet. Daniel stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee, the kind he never finished anymore. Maya was still asleep, her recital ribbon resting beside the keyboard like a crown. He reached up to the cupboard above the fridge, looking for his old phone charger, the backup one. Instead, his fingers brushed something cold and metallic, a small, dusty voice recorder. He pulled it down slowly. Hadn't seen it in years. It used to sit in the hospital room beside his wife's bed, catching fragments of her voice when her strength had faded too. Far to speak for long, he clicked it on. The light flickered. One message. Dated a month before she passed, his thumb hovered. Then pressed play. Static. Then, "Hey love." Her voice, soft, familiar, like a window opened into a day he'd never forget. "If you're hearing this, it means you did it." You kept going. Daniel's breath hitched. "I know things are hard right now. Maybe Maya's playing piano. Maybe you're still working nights. Maybe you haven't forgiven yourself for all the times you couldn't fix everything." A pause, "But I never picked you for perfect. I picked you because you don't quit." Another breath, slower now. "Whatever table you're sitting at, I hope you know you've earned your place." Daniel sank into the kitchen chair, hand pressed over his mouth. "I love you, both of you, and if she's playing music, that means something in me didn't die." The message ended in a hum, her hum, the one she used to sing to Maya when she was scared, and in that moment, Daniel realized he wasn't just building a life from scratch. He was finishing the song she had started with, him. The keys felt heavier in his hand than any plate he'd ever carried. Daniel stood outside the diner in the early morning chill, paint chipped from the doorframe. The neon sign blinked open, even though it WASN single quotes T, not yet. He unlocked it slowly. The bell above the door jingled like a familiar voice saying, "Welcome home." Everything looked the same. Tired booths, scuffed tile, grease, ghosts on the window glass. But it didn't feel the same. He stood in the center. The letter from Thomas folded in his jacket pocket. The deed tucked into his glove box. This place had once been a graveyard of grief. Now, it was something else. He opened the back storage room, found a rusted red toolbox, and started with what he knew. The squeaky hinge on the front door. One turn of the wrench, then another by noon. He had moved on to scrubbing the walls, tossing out chipped mugs, stacking menus that hadn't been touched in years. By sunset, the jukebox had been wiped clean, even if it still didn't play. That evening, as Daniel dragged old stools into the alley for donation, a neighbor paused. "You buying the place?" the man asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, I was handed it." The man raised a brow. "Who'd give away a diner?" Daniel smiled. "Someone who finally found someone worth giving it to." The neighbor nodded slowly. "You need help fixing it?" Daniel hesitated. Then, "Yeah, I do." The man waved to more folks over from the sidewalk. Within minutes, a small circle of neighbors stood by the door, each offering hands, stories, tools. The place that had once held only ghosts now echoed with voices. And the first thing they fixed wasn't a booth or a bulb, it was the silence. The new paint smelled like second chances. By week's end, the walls were brighter, the booths and the kitchen cleaned down to its bones. Daniel stood behind the counter in a fresh apron, running his hands along the smooth surface like he was meeting it for the first time. The diner opened quietly, no fanfare, no signs, just the doors unlocked, the lights on, and the coffee brewing. At 7:12 a.m., the first customer walked in, an old man with a limp and a face carved by sun and memory. He paused at the door, blinked twice. This used to be Lydell's, didn't it?" Daniel nodded, pouring coffee into a clean cup. "Still is, in a way." The man shuffled to a booth, sat down slowly. "I ate here every Sunday with my wife. Back when biscuits came with stories, Daniel brought over a plate of eggs and toast, the way Thomas used to serve it. I didn't know him well," Daniel said, "but I think he remembered all of you." The old man looked around, eyes misting. "He gave me my first job. Back in '94, took a risk on a guy no one else would touch." More people trickled in, a mother with 2 kids. A bus driver off shift, a woman who used to write poetry in the corner booth, each paused at the door. Each said the same thing. I remember this place, they ordered. They ate. They lingered, but this time their eyes scanned not just the menu, but the walls, the floors, the feeling in the air. Because something had shifted, the ghosts were still there. But now, they were sitting beside Hope, and for the first time in years, people didn't want to leave after breakfast. Daddy, can I read you something? Daniel looked up from wiping the counter. Maya stood in the doorway of the diner's back office, holding a single sheet of paper, her hands folded like it was sacred. Of course, he said, drying his hands. You want me to sit? She nodded. He took a seat in booth to her favorite spot now, as she climbed up across from him. Eyes bright, cheeks flushed with nervous pride. It's for school. We had to write about someone who changed our life. He leaned in. Who'd you pick? She smiled softly. You and someone else. She cleared her throat and began, the man who gave my dad hope. My dad works harder than anyone I know. He's kind, tired, and strong. But sometimes, strong people get tired in places you can't see. A few months ago, someone started leaving him envelopes. No name, just help. Money, letters, even a recipe. My dad didn't know who it was, but I think it was someone who saw the invisible things my dad carried. That person gave us more than money. He gave my dad the strength to believe we could still dream. And now, this diner we sit in, it used to be his dot, but now it's ours dot. And maybe that's what kindness is, leaving something behind so someone else can finally move forward. She looked up, blinking quickly. Too cheesy. Daniel's eyes glistened. It's perfect. She slid the paper over. Miss Renner said they might publish it in the district newsletter. He smiled. I hope they do. He reached across the table, took her hand gently, and in that moment, the diner wasn't just rebuilt, it was remembered, because her words didn't just honor a man. They resurrected his legacy. The lunch rush had just ended when the bell above, the diner door chimed again. Daniel looked up from the sink, expecting another regular. Instead, it was Miss Renner, Maya's music teacher. She stood near the entrance, taking it all in, the fresh paint, the warm smell of biscuits. The buzz of quiet joy that lingered like piano notes in the walls. Miss Renner, Daniel asked, stepping out from behind the counter. She smiled, walking forward. Sorry to drop in. I was in the neighborhood. I had to see it for myself. He motioned to a booth. Please sit. She slid into booth 3. Daniel poured her a coffee without asking. I read Maya's essay, she said, wrapping her hands around the cup. It made me cry in the teacher's lounge. Daniel chuckled softly. She's got her mother's heart. She's also got your persistence, Renner replied. She's growing. Musically, emotionally, there's something raw in her playing now. It's not technique, it's truth. Daniel's smile faded into something more tender. Miss Renner reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder. There's a private music academy in the city. They offer full scholarships for kids with something unique. I sent them Maya's audition video. Daniel's eyes widened. You what? She handed him the folder. Inside was a letter of interest addressed to Maya Holt. They want to meet her next month. If she passes, she gets in. Daniel stared at the words, heart thunderous. She doesn't even know yet. You should be the one to tell her. He looked up at her, overwhelmed. Why are you doing this? Miss Renner smiled. Because someone gave you hope, and you gave it to her. She stood, nodding toward the kitchen. And that's what real legacy looks like. Friday night shimmered with string lights and second chances. The diner, once silent past sundown, now buzzed with soft voices and chords tuning in the background. Daniel had moved the front booths aside, cleared space near the windows, and taped a handwritten sign on the door. Open mic night, all heart. No judgment, the place filled fast regulars, strangers, musicians clutching guitars like lifelines. Maya sat near the stage keyboard in front of her, fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Daniel knelt beside her. You okay? She nodded, nervous. What if I mess up? He smiled. Then you'll be just like everyone else here, brave. The crowd quieted as Daniel stepped to the mic. Welcome, he said. This place used to belong to someone who believed in second chances. He gave me mine. Tonight, we're passing it. On applause, warm, kind, a teenage boy sang a folk song about his grandfather. An elderly woman read poetry about missing her kitchen table. Then Maya stood small, still. She took a breath. Pressed a key. The same melody, Thomas's melody, flowed from her hands, steady now, confident, like it belonged to her, like it always had. The room fell still. No forks clinked. No cups stirred. Just notes, rising and falling like prayers whispered through walls. When she finished, silence lingered. Then the room erupted. Claps, cheers. Someone whistling from the back. Maya looked at her dad. Beaming, he mouthed. You did it, she mouthed back. So did you. And in that moment, the diner wasn't just a place for food. It was a stage for healing. A spotlight for redemption. A mic held out to anyone with a voice and the courage to use it. The next morning, the diner was quiet again. Not empty, just resting. Sunlight spilled through the front windows, catching flecks of flour in the air like floating stars. Daniel stood behind the counter, holding a frame in both hands. Inside it, the very first note Thomas ever left him. For the man who never stops, the handwriting was slightly faded. The paper creased, but the weight of it hadn't changed. Daniel stared at it a moment longer, then found a perfect spot, just to the right of table 9, above the sugar jar shelf. He hung it gently. Stepping back, it fit like it had been waiting for that wall all along. Customers came and went all morning, nodding at the frame as they passed, some pausing to read it, others just understanding. Maya wandered in after school, her backpack thumping as she dropped it on a stool. She looked up, squinted. You framed it. Daniel nodded. It's part of this place. What does it mean? He smiled softly. It means someone saw me. When I didn't think anyone was looking, she looked at it again, brow furrowed, then smiled. I like it. He kissed her on the forehead. Me too. Later, a woman wrote something in a napkin, folded it, and left it under her plate. A man at the counter left his coffee paid forward. A kid offered to mop in exchange for a sandwich, and the note watched, quietly from the wall, witness to a place becoming more than a business. Sanctuary. A reminder because some words don't fade with time. They echo. They ripple. They root deep in people who don't even know why they're moved. And on that diner wall, framed in wood and truth, one sentence whispered endlessly. Kindness echoes beyond time by the second week. The bell above the door rang for a new reason. Not just breakfast, but music. Daniel had pushed 2 tables together by the front window, set up Maya's keyboard beside them, and hung a sign drawn in her bright markers. Free piano lessons for anyone with a song to tell. At first, only one boy showed up, shy, couldn't sit still, said his fingers were too dumb to learn. Maya sat beside him. That's okay, she whispered. My fingers were scared too. He played a single note, then another. By the end of the week, 5 kids came in after school, some with instruments, some without, but all carrying something inside that wanted out. Daniel brought over chocolate milk, wiped peanut butter off the keys, and tuned out the noise, joyful, chaotic healing. One afternoon, a girl pressed a small sequence of notes. Familiar. Daniel froze at the counter. For notes. Slow, rising, the same ones Thomas used to hum, the same ones Maya had woven into her audition. He turned. Where'd you learn that? He asked gently. The girl shrugged. I dunno. Maya showed me, said it helps you feel brave. Daniel nodded slowly, eyes stinging. He looked around, kids laughing, playing, trying. No perfection. Just effort, just heart. And in that moment, he saw it clearly. Thomas's melody wasn't just being remembered, it was being reborn note by note, child by child. Every song they played added another brick to a foundation built not with money or plans, but with pain turned into purpose and love passed down like sheet music. For the soul, the diner was closed early that evening. Daniel left Maya with her aunt, pulled on his coat, and drove until the city faded behind him. He parked near the old footbridge, the one he and his wife used to walk when Maya was a baby strapped to his chest. Now, the river moved slow beneath the twilight sky, its surface glinting like scattered glass. Daniel stepped onto the path, boots crunching over fallen leaves, in his pocket. A photograph. Thomas and Eliza. He took it out as he reached the bend in the trail where the trees opened wide, giving way to the river's quiet grace. He stood there for a long time, breathing, listening, thinking about ghosts, the kind that don't rattle chains, but whisper in piano notes and diner booths, the kind that don't haunt, but guide. He traced the edges of the photo with his thumb. "You saved me too." "Thomas," he whispered. The breeze caught the edge of the riverbank. Tugging at his coat like a child's hand, he pulled out a pen on the back of the photograph. Beneath Thomas's scrawled handwriting, he added his own. "She still plays, and I still listen." Then he tucked it back into his coat. Not to release it, but to carry it forward. Because this wasn't a goodbye. It was a chapter turned. A song played again. And as Daniel walked back toward the car, the sun dipped below the hills, casting the water in golden silence. Behind him, the river flowed on, quiet, strong, eternal. Just like the love of a man who once waited at table 9 and found redemption in the echo of another father's fight. It came in a plain envelope, yellowed slightly at the corners, tucked between bills and junk mail. No return address, just his name. In that same familiar handwriting, Daniel sat at the counter in the diner, heart tightening as he turned it over. Postmarked 2 weeks ago, he opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, no photos, no money, just words. "Daniel, if this reaches you, then I've done something right with my last breath. I asked the nurse to mail it when it was time. If I'm honest, I didn't expect to still have words left in me. But you taught me that some words are worth waiting for. You became the man I couldn't. That's not flattery, it's fact. You stayed when I ran. You held when I broke. You listened when silence felt safer. And when I watched you raise that little girl, when I heard her play the melody I used to hum to forget my past, I realized the best parts of us can live on in others. So I leave you this, not just a deed or a booth or a story. I leave you the belief that even broken men can build something beautiful. Tell her she plays with soul. Tell her she saved a stranger. And tell yourself, when doubt creeps in, that you were enough. You always were." Thomas A. Little Daniel's eyes blurred as he folded the letter. Back with shaking hands, he looked up at the wall, where Thomas's first note still hung. Then back at the letter, in his hand. And, for a long time, he just sat there in the heart of a place built by regret, but reborn in love. The sun rose like applause over the rooftops. Washing the diner in golden light, Daniel stood outside in a clean button-down shirt, fresh paint glinting behind him. The old neon sign had been replaced with a hand-carved wooden one that read, "The Ninth Table, a Tribute." A promise, a memory preserved. He tied his apron with trembling fingers, not from nerves, from disbelief, because somehow, grief had grown roots here, and from those roots, a home had risen. Maya stood beside him, holding a tray of mini biscuits wrapped in parchment. "Do you think anyone will come?" He smiled at her. "I think they're already here." And they were. The first woman in line was the elderly poet from open mic night. Behind her, the man who sang for his grandfather. Behind him, Miss Renner. Then neighbors, strangers, old customers who remembered Thomas. One by one, they filed in. Tables filled. Coffee poured. Music played softly through the newly fixed speakers. A boy played the keyboard in the corner, one of Maya's students. A little off-tempo, a little too loud. But no one minded. Daniel moved between tables, laughing, serving, listening. He glanced at table 9. Empty, intentionally so. A single black rose rested on the table. Beside it, the original napkin note, framed in a small easel. For the man who never stops, no one sat there. Everyone noticed, because the seat wasn't empty anymore. It was full of what it had always held. Memory, meaning, love, redemption. And as the crowd buzzed and Maya waved from behind the counter, Daniel stepped back, exhaled, and whispered beneath his breath. This place was never mine. And now, it was finally everyone's. The lunch crowd had just thinned when the bell above the door jingled again. Daniel glanced up from the register, expecting another regular. But the woman who stepped inside wasn't from town. She was young, maybe late 20s, dressed in a soft gray coat, wind-tangled hair, and a calm in her eyes that carried weight. She looked around slowly. As if searching for a ghost, Daniel stepped forward. "Welcome to the 9th table, table 4. She cut him off gently. "I'm looking for the owner." He paused. "That's me." She offered a small, hesitant smile. "Then you must be Daniel Holt." He nodded, guarded now. "I am." She reached into her coat and pulled out a letter, a yellowed one folded neatly. "I'm Eliza," she said softly. "Thomas Little was my father." The world seemed to still. Daniel stared at her, stunned. She looked so much like the girl in the photograph. Same eyes, same quiet eye. "I didn't know how to find you," she continued. "Until I got this. It arrived yesterday. It had your name, this diner, a story I didn't know I was part of." Daniel slowly took the letter, heart pounding. "I read your daughter's article," Elisa added, glancing around, "and I saw his handwriting. I hadn't seen it since I was 10. She looked over at table 9 and froze. The framed note, the space. "I remember that table," she whispered. Daniel gestured gently. "Do you play?" She gave a quiet nod. Moments later, Eliza sat at Maya's keyboard. Her fingers trembled. Then she began to play slow, unsure but familiar. It was the melody, Thomas's melody, and as she played it, tearfully, beautifully, Daniel realized something profound. The song had come home, and so had she. The diner lights dimmed as the evening crowd settled. Into their seats, neighbors, musicians, teachers, children, who now called this place their second home. At the center of it all stood Daniel, not behind the counter, but by table 9, where a single candle flickered beside the framed note and black rose. Maya stood beside him, eyes wide with pride. Elisa, too, seated near the front, hands folded in her lap, her father's presence radiating through her quiet breath. Daniel cleared his throat, holding a single sheet of paper in his hand. "Tonight," he began, "we honor the man who once sat here in silence, a man many of you never knew, but whose love built this place, one quiet act at a time." He unfolded the letter, the last one Thomas had written, and began to read. "Daniel, you became the man I couldn't. The best parts of us live on in others. Tell her she saved a stranger. Tell yourself you were always enough." The room hushed. The only sounds were soft breaths and the hum of the fridge. Daniel's voice wavered near the end, but he held strong when he finished. He looked up. Silence. Then a single clap. Then another dot, and suddenly the diner was filled with applause. Not loud, not wild, but honest. Elisa stood and crossed to table 9. Gently, on the framed note, Maya stepped forward too, placed a tiny origami star beside the candle. Daniel looked around at the faces, young and old, familiar and new. And in that moment, the 9th table wasn't just a tribute, it was a chapter, closing, a memory shared, a final letter. Read aloud so no one would ever forget how much it meant to be seen. The diner reopened early the next morning, but it felt different, not heavier. Not sad. Lighter, that like something had been released. Daniel stood at the counter with Maya's acceptance letter in his hand. Across from him, she packed her backpack with a nervous excitement. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, handing her the final printout. She nodded, zipping her bag. "They're picking me up at 10, he smiled, pulling her into a hug. "Just remember to breathe, and eat, and sleep once in a while." She grinned. "I'll try, but music doesn't like sleep." They laughed together. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. She looked up. "You gonna cry?" He wiped his eyes with mock drama. "Only a little." The doorbell rang as a small-town shuttle parked outside. Miss Renner stepped in, nodding warmly. "It's time," she said. Maya turned back to Daniel. "I'll call you every night. You better." She paused by the door, then ran back, threw her arms around him. "Tell table 9 I'll be back someday." He held her tight. "It'll be here." Then she was gone, bouncing into the van. Waving through the window as it pulled away down the street, Daniel stood in the doorway, hands in his apron pockets, watching the road fade into the trees. Then he turned back inside. Customers were already trickling in, coffee cups waiting. Laughter beginning to return. He tied his apron tighter, rolled up his sleeves, and stepped behind the counter. Not as a man burdened, but as a man beginning again. Because the music hadn't ended. It had just moved into another verse, and this time, he wasn't afraid to sing along. "You said, the diner's jukebox, long dormant, hummed to life." Daniel had spent weeks fixing its wiring, scouring thrift shops for records that still worked. Now, as morning sunlight poured through the windows, soft notes of an old jazz ballad filled the air. Warm, familiar. Kids tapped their feet beneath booths. Elisa sat near table 9, journal open. Scribbling quietly behind the counter, Daniel brewed a fresh pot. Pausing to take it all in, his eyes landed on the framed note, then on the keys that still hung behind the register, then on the empty chair across from table 9, always waiting, never filled. The melody shifted. The piano joined the horns, a slow rising pattern that mimicked Maya's first recital piece. The notes she'd learned not from sheet music, but from something older. Daniel closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw her little hands pressing keys in the living room, biting her lip in concentration. Then Thomas, silent in the booth, humming that same rhythm between sips of untouched coffee, and beyond even that, his wife, sitting beside Maya, guiding her with a nod. Laughing softly, the music rose. Full room now, Maya's first chord, Thomas's hum, Eliza's silent smile, and Daniel standing in the middle of it all, the quiet, faithful conductor of a symphony that had taken years to reach its crescendo. He opened his eyes again. No fanfare, no spotlight, just a single tear sliding down his cheek, and a truth, steady as the beat. Some songs never end. They echo, they evolve, and if you're lucky, they become the soundtrack of the life you fought to hold together. The diner closed early that night, not for repairs, not for rest, but for something sacred. Daniel locked the doors, turned off the fluorescent lights, and lit a single candle at table 9. He placed it next to the black rose now slightly wilted and the framed note that had become a beacon for every person who had ever felt unseen. He didn't rush, didn't speak. He simply sat. Eliza arrived quietly, holding a small bundle wrapped in a handkerchief. She sat across from him, unfolded it gently. Inside was a cassette tape worn, labeled in fading ink, Eliza, age 7. First song. Daniel raised an eyebrow. He recorded it. She said softly, "The day I wrote my first melody." He played backup on an old guitar with 2 broken strings. She placed the tape next to the candle. "I used to hate him for disappearing," she whispered. "Now I realize, he never really left. He just didn't know how to stay." Daniel nodded, the silence between them rich with forgiveness. He reached beneath the table, pulled out a lighter, and lit a second candle. Then a third. Then a fourth. Each one for a memory. A moment. A man who rebuilt his legacy in silence, one by one. Staff members and neighbors trickled in, each lighting their own candle. No speeches, no announcements. Just flickers of light, stretching across the diner like stars across a night sky, and when every flame was lit, Daniel stepped back, looked around, and whispered toward the corner booth. "Thank you, old friend, because this place wasn't just serving meals anymore, it was serving stories. Lighting wounds, carving grief into grace. One flame at a time, one table at a time." The diner opened quietly the next morning. The candlelight from the night before had faded, but their warmth remained in the walls, in the windows, in the way every guest smiled just a little longer before ordering their coffee. Daniel stood at the counter, polishing a mug slowly, lost in thought. Then the bell rang. He looked up Maya. She stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, taller now, not just in height, but in presence. The city had changed her, grown her. She grinned. "I told the academy I needed a weekend off. Figured you'd need a refill on your napkin stash." Daniel rushed from behind the counter, wrapped her in a hug that tried and failed to not be too tight. "I missed you," he whispered. She stepped back, eyes scanning the room. "It's different, but it still feels like us." He nodded. "Always will." She walked to the old keyboard by the front window, still tucked beside the same table she used to teach at. She sat, ran her fingers across the keys. Then she began to play. Not a practiced recital piece, but the piece. Thomas's melody, soft, gentle, complete. Now the room stilled, customers paused. Dishes froze in midair. Even the coffee pot seemed to listen. Daniel turned toward. Table 9. Empty. Still sacred. Still watching. And as Maya's music swelled, filling every corner of the diner with memory, love, and something beyond both. Daniel closed his eyes. He saw them all, his wife, Thomas, Eliza as a girl, Maya at the piano. The diner wasn't just full, it was whole, and when the final note landed, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a song finally home forever.